Sir Hugh Brandt lifted the letter above his head, where every guest in the Asherton ballroom could see the broken seal, and he smiled at Adelaide Marsh, as a man smiles when he has already won. "I think," he said, and his voice carried the way only a practiced cruelty can carry, "the room ought to hear what Miss Marsh writes in private. It is such a tender hand, such warmth. One would never guess, to look at her standing there so demure, that she pours it out for a man who cleans other men's stables." The music had stopped. Adelaide felt the stop in her teeth before she heard the absence of it. 200 faces turned toward her at once, and she understood, with the cold clarity that comes only when a thing is already too late, that she had perhaps 4 seconds before her name became a word that mothers used to frighten daughters. The candlelight slid along the gilt edges of the letter in his fingers. She knew that paper. She knew the slope of her own writing on it. Every reckless, honest line she had set down, believing no eye but one would ever read them. She did not run. She had promised herself, long ago, and for reasons that had nothing to do with this room, that she would never again give anyone the satisfaction of watching her run. So she stood, and she lifted her chin, and she prepared to be destroyed with whatever was left of her dignity intact. She did not see the man crossing the floor until he was nearly upon Sir Hugh. He came without hurry, which was somehow worse than haste would have been. The unhurried walk of a man who has decided something and sees no reason to discuss it. He was broad through the shoulders, dark-haired, plainly the largest man in a room full of slender dancing masters, and he wore his evening black as though it were an inconvenience he tolerated. Adelaide's breath caught for an entirely different reason than fear, because she knew him too, and the knowing made no sense at all in this place. He reached out one wide hand and took the letter from Sir Hugh's fingers. He did not snatch it. He simply closed his grip and drew it away, the way one removes a sharp object from a child. And Sir Hugh, who outranked half the room and feared none of it, let go. "You'll permit me," the dark-haired man said. It was not a question. And then, while the whole of Asherton held its breath, he unfolded the letter, tilted it to the candle, and began to read aloud. Every word. He did not skip the parts that should have ruined her. He read them slowly, in a low, carrying voice, as though the words were his own and he was proud of them. And Adelaide stood in the center of the floor with her heart slamming, and understood that she did not know in that moment whether this stranger she was not a stranger to had come to save her or to finish what Sir Hugh had begun. To understand how a duke came to be reading a poor companion's love letter aloud in a crowded ballroom, you have to go back 11 weeks, to a wet morning in early April, before any of them knew his name. The lending library in the market town of Harden Cross was the sort of establishment that survived on subscriptions of £0.50 and the determined patronage of women who had nowhere warmer to be. It occupied the upper floor of a draper's shop on the square. It smelled of damp wool and old glue, and the particular dust that settles only on books no one has opened in a decade. And on the second Tuesday of April, it acquired, without warning or apology, a new and entirely unwelcome occupant. Adelaide Marsh disliked him on sight, which was unusual for her, because, as a rule, she reserved her dislike for people who had earned it, and this man had done nothing yet but stand in the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the floorboards she had just that morning persuaded the draper's boy to sweep. He was very large. That was the first thing. He filled the low doorway so completely that the grey light from the square had to find its way around him, and he had to stoop to enter. And when he straightened, he very nearly put his head among the cobwebs that garlanded the lower shelves. He wore a plain dark coat of good cloth, gone shabby at the cuffs, riding boots splashed to the knee, and the expression of a man who had been sent somewhere he did not wish to go, and meant to be done with it quickly. "You are dripping," Adelaide said, before she could remind herself that she was a paid companion of no fortune, and he was, whatever else he was, a gentleman. On the floor, which is wood, which warps. He looked down at the spreading dark patch beneath his boots, as though it had appeared there by some other agency than his own. "So it does," he said. "My apologies to the floor." "The floor cannot hear you. I can. I am the one who must answer to Mrs. Penhallow when the boards lift, and Mrs. Penhallow can hear a thing that has not yet happened." She came around the little desk with a cloth she kept for exactly such crises, because rain in April was not a rare disaster, but a daily one, and she crouched and wiped the boards at his feet without waiting for his leave. "There is a stand for wet coats by the door. There has always been a stand for wet coats by the door. It is the first thing one sees." "It is behind me." Most useful things are, to a man who has just walked past them. She heard him make a sound above her. Not quite a laugh, more the abrupt exhalation of a man surprised into the beginning of one and thinking better of it. When she rose, the cloth dark and heavy in her hand, she found him looking at her with an attention that she did not like and could not place. It was not the look she was accustomed to receiving from gentlemen, which slid over her face and down and away again and weighed her in pounds per annum. This was a steadier thing. He looked at her as though she were a sentence he had not expected to find in the middle of a dull page, and meant to read twice. "You work here," he said. "I am here 3 mornings in the week, when Mrs. Penhallow can spare me, which, she would tell you, is never, and does anyway. The other mornings I read to her, and the afternoons I walk her dog, who hates me. And the evenings I write her letters, which she dictates, and then disowns." Adelaide put the cloth back in its bucket. "You did not come here for my hours, sir. The library is through the second arch. If you want the agricultural reports, they are under the window, and they have not been touched since the old king was young. If you want a novel, you must ask, because I keep the good ones behind the desk, where the curate cannot frown at them." "And which," he said, "is the good one?" She studied him a moment. It was a small test, and she administered it to everyone, and almost everyone failed it. "That depends," she said, "on whether you want to be comforted or unsettled." "I have had a surfeit of comfort," said the man in the shabby good coat, "and very little that unsettles me at all. Lately I find I miss it." Adelaide, against every instinct of self-preservation she possessed, smiled. She had not meant to. She had a great many reasons not to, chief among them the long habit of a woman who had learned that smiling at gentlemen was a kind of unsecured loan, repaid rarely and at ruinous interest. But the smile came before the caution did, and by the time the caution arrived, the thing was done, and the large, damp stranger had seen it, and something in his own grim face eased by a fraction in answer. "Sinclair," he said. "Nathaniel Sinclair. I am to be at the Grange 3 months or thereabouts, putting the place to rights, the roof chiefly, and the accounts, which are worse than the roof." A pause. "I shall need something to read in the evenings. There is no society at the Grange but mice, and the mice are poor conversation." "Adelaide Marsh," she said, because there seemed no reason not to, and because Mr. Nathaniel Sinclair, who was putting the Grange to rights, was plainly a steward, or an agent, or some such upper servant of consequence, a man of her own difficult middle country, too well-spoken for the kitchen, too poor for the parlour, and she felt, with him, none of the careful, armoured wariness she wore among her betters. "I shall find you something to be unsettled by. Come back Thursday." He came back Thursday. What Adelaide did not know that April, what she could not have known, because the man took some private, perverse pleasure in keeping it from her, a pleasure he did not examine too closely, was that Nathaniel Sinclair was no steward. He was Nathaniel Vane, 9th Duke of Ellesmere, and the Grange she had come to put to rights was the smallest and least of the 11 properties that had descended upon him, with a suddenness that still woke him at night, on the death of a cousin he had met perhaps twice. He had not been raised to it. That was the thing none of the people now bowing to him could be made to understand. He had been a second son's second son, a soldier, a man with a competence and a horse, and the blessed anonymity of being no one in particular. And then a fever in a foreign city had reached up through the family tree and pruned it of every man between himself and the title. and he had come home to find himself a duke, with a duke's tenants and a duke's debts and a duke's aunt, who had opinions about whom he would marry that she expressed at every meal and several times between. He had come to the Grange to escape her. He had told the household, and his man of business, and the dowager herself, that the small estate required his personal attention, which was true, and that he would receive no callers, which was also true, and which had nothing to do with the actual reason, which was that he was tired unto his soul of being looked at as a coronet with a man somewhere inside it. In the lending library above the draper's shop, no one looked at him so. A sharp-tongued young woman with ink on her fingers and rain in her hair had wiped the floor at his feet and scolded him for a wet coat, and not once, in the whole of their acquaintance, had she lowered her eyes, or softened her voice, or asked him for anything at all. She did not know he could ruin or make her with a word. She argued with him about books. It was, he thought, riding back to the Grange that first Tuesday with a novel she had pressed on him under his arm and the rain forgotten, the most restful thing that had happened to him in 14 months. He told himself he would correct the misunderstanding soon. He told himself that on Thursday, and again the following Tuesday, and again. And somewhere in the telling, the soon quietly became later, and the later became a thing he did not look at directly, the way one does not look directly at the sun, or at a hope one cannot afford. By the end of April they had a habit, and the habit was this. He came on the mornings she kept the library. He pretended, for the first quarter hour, to be interested in the agricultural reports under the window, and she pretended, for the first quarter hour, to be occupied with the subscription ledger. And then one or the other of them would say something, a remark on the weather, a complaint about the curate, an observation about the book he was returning, and the pretense would collapse, and they would talk until a real subscriber climbed the stairs, and they sprang apart like two children caught at the jam. A typical morning ran something like this. He would set a finished novel on the desk between them, and she would look at it, and look at him, and say, 3 days. You had it 3 days. It was 400 pages. It was 312, and dull in the middle, and you skipped the dull part, because no honest man finishes a dull middle in 3 days. She would turn the book over, smelling of glue and the cedar she kept in the desk against the damp. Tell me what the heroine did in the chapter at the inn. She waited, he said, for the author to remember she had a spine. There, you did skip it. But she was fighting a smile, and the losing pleased him more than winning ever had. You are the worst sort of reader, Mr. Sinclair. You want only the parts where something happens. I have had a great deal of the parts where nothing happens, he said. 14 months of them. I find I have lost my patience for waiting heroines. Then you shall have an impatient one. She reached beneath the desk, past the curate-proof shelf, and drew out a slim volume, bound in faded green. This one stabs a man on the second page and apologizes to no one. You will either love her or be frightened of her. Which would you prefer? That, said Adelaide Marsh, sliding the green book across the worn wood into his wide and waiting hand, is the most interesting question you have asked me. Come back Thursday and tell me which it was. She learned things about him in pieces, the way one assembles a person from glimpses. That he had been a soldier, he let that slip over a dispute about a battle scene in a novel, correcting the author with the flat certainty of a man who had been there. That he read faster than anyone she had ever supplied, and remembered all of it, so that she could not fob him off with anything second-rate. That under the grimness, there was a dry, slow humour that did not announce itself but waited, like a card held back, to be played at the moment of greatest effect. But he was lonely. That one she did not learn. She recognized it, because it lived in her own chest, and she knew its face. He learned things about her, too, and learned them with a hunger that should have warned him. That she was the daughter of a naval captain who had died with more honor than money, leaving her a competence that lasted exactly as long as her mother's illness, and not 1/4 beyond it. That she had been, for 3 years now, companion to Mrs. Penhallow, a widow of comfortable means and uncomfortable temper, who paid her £30 a year and the privilege of being needed. That she had once had what the world called prospects, and had lost them, and would not say how, and the not saying drew a line around a wound he found he badly wished to see, and was not yet permitted to. And that she wrote. This he discovered by accident, on a wet morning in the first week of May, when a real subscriber's arrival sent her scrambling, and a folded paper slid from beneath her ledger, and he, retrieving it for her, saw a line in her hand before she snatched it back, scarlet to the ears. "Give it here." "I beg your pardon, I was only—" "It is nothing. It is foolishness. Give it here." He gave it back, but he had seen the line, and the line had not been nothing. It had been a single sentence about the way the light came into the library in the late morning, when the sun got past the draper's chimney at last, and it had been so exactly, so unbearably true, that he had felt it in his sternum like a struck bell. He thought about it riding home. He thought about it that night, in the cold cavern of the Grange, with a single candle and the mice. The next morning, he did a thing he could not afterward entirely justify. He left a letter for her. He did not sign it Ellesmere. He did not sign it Sinclair, even. He wrote, on a half-sheet, without salutation or signature, his own answer to her stolen sentence. What the light did at the Grange in the evening. How it came gold and level across a floor no one had walked on in years, and made the dust look like something holy. And how he had stood in it the night before and thought, for the first time in 14 months, that a ruined place might still be worth the mending. He folded it, and he tucked it inside the novel he was returning, and he set the novel on her desk while her back was turned, and he left before she opened it. He told himself it was a private joke, a continuation of an argument about whether a place could be comforting or unsettling. He told himself a great many things, riding home, and not one of them was the truth, which was that he had wanted, more than he had wanted anything in 14 months, for her to write him back. She wrote him back. He found it the next morning, folded into the same novel which he had left on the shelf where he always looked first, as though she had known he would. There was no name on it either. There was only her answer. 3 lines about the evening light, and then a 4th that was not about light at all, that said, "Whoever you are this morning, sir, you are not the man who dripped on my floor. That man would never have noticed the dust looked holy. I begin to think there are 2 of you, and I have been talking to the wrong one." And Nathaniel Vane, 9th Duke of Ellesmere, stood in a lending library above a draper's shop, with a poor companion's unsigned letter in his hand, and felt the floor of his careful life tilt very gently, and not at all in a direction he could afford. The letters became the thing beneath the thing. In the mornings, in the library, they were Mr. Sinclair and Miss Marsh, and they argued about books and the curate and the appalling state of the agricultural reports, and a subscriber climbing the stairs would have seen nothing but a steward and a companion being faintly improper in their familiarity. But folded inside the books that passed between them was the other conversation, the unsigned one, the one neither of them spoke aloud, and in that one they were not careful at all. In the letters she told him things she had told no one. Not the great wound. She circled that still, and he had learned not to press. But the smaller, true things. That she was tired in a way that sleep did not touch. That she had wanted, once, to see the sea her father sailed, and now never would. That there were mornings she resented Mrs. Penhallow with a violence that frightened her. And mornings she loved the old woman so fiercely she could have wept, and could not always tell the 2 feelings apart. She wrote the way a person writes who has been alone a long time, and has just discovered, with astonishment, a door in a wall she had thought was solid. And he wrote back as Sinclair, which was to say, he wrote back as himself. The self the title had buried. The soldier, the second son, the man who had once been no one, and had been happier as no one, than he had ever been as a duke. He could not tell her who he was. Every week it grew harder to tell her, because every week the not telling grew into a larger and more dreadful thing. A lie that had started as a small omission and was now a structure he lived inside. But he could tell her everything else. He told her about the war, the parts he had never told anyone, the cold and the fear, and the friend he had buried in foreign ground. He told her about the title, disguised. A burden has fallen to me that I did not want and am not fit for, and everyone who looks at me sees the burden and not the man. And I had begun to think the man had died, until a woman wiped a floor at my feet and would not look at me as the burden at all. She did not know what burden. She thought, perhaps, debt, a position overpromised, the weight of a great household's accounts laid on a steward's shoulders. She worked back. Then let them look at the burden. I will keep looking at the man. Someone ought to, and I find I am qualified, having a great deal of practice at being overlooked myself. He read that one 4 times. He carried it inside his coat for a week. It could not last, of course. He knew it could not last. A duke does not court a companion through unsigned notes in a lending library, and a man who has built a tenderness on a false name cannot keep both the tenderness and the truth. One of them must give. He knew all of this with the clear, cold part of his mind that had kept him alive in the war. And he went on anyway. Tuesday after Thursday after Tuesday. Because the alternative was to go back to being the burden, alone. And he had discovered in himself a cowardice he had not known he owned. He would do almost anything, tell almost any lie, to keep being, for 3 mornings in the week, simply the man she looked at. The reckoning, when it came, did not come from him. It came, as reckonings so often do, from a man who wanted her and could not have her, and could not forgive her the wanting. Sir Hugh Brant was the handsomest man in the district, and the best aware of it. He had 4,000 a year, a profile that had broken hearts from Harden Cross to Bath, and the particular settled confidence of a man who had never once, in 32 years, been refused anything he had troubled himself to want. He wore his fair hair brushed forward in the fashionable manner. He danced like a man who had practiced in a glass, and when he smiled, the whole of his face joined in the smile so charmingly that it took most people a full season to notice his eyes never did. He had decided, the previous autumn, that he wanted Adelaide Marsh. It was not love. Sir Hugh was not capable of the thing, though he could counterfeit it well enough to fill a betrothal. It was something nearer to acquisition. She was poor, which meant she ought to be grateful. She was beautiful in a way that did not announce itself, and so seemed to a collector more genuinely valuable than the announced kind. And she had looked at him once, across Mrs. Penhallow's drawing room, with an expression of perfect composed indifference that no woman had ever before turned upon Sir Hugh Brant. And the indifference had lit in him a determination that no amount of her subsequent civility could put out. He had courted her through the winter in his fashion, which was to say he had appeared wherever she was, paid her the kind of attention that obligates without committing, and waited for her to understand her good fortune. In March, he had proposed. He had done it handsomely, in Mrs. Penhallow's morning room, with the old woman's avaricious blessing already secured, and he had been so certain of the answer that he had brought the ring. Adelaide had refused him. She had done it gently and completely, and without the smallest crack through which he might push a renewed siege. She had thanked him for the honor. She had said, with a steadiness he found he could not forgive, that she did not love him, and did not think she could learn to, and that she held him in too much respect. This was a lie, and he heard that it was a lie. To marry where she could not love. And then she had risen and rung for tea, as though she had declined a second helping of cake rather than 4,000 a year and the chance to stop being a servant. Sir Hugh had smiled and bowed and taken his ring away, and he had begun, that same afternoon, to hate her, with the quiet, patient, well-tailored hatred of a man whose vanity is the only thing in him that can truly bleed. For a month he watched her, and what he saw, by April's end, was a woman transformed, lighter, quicker, with a private warmth about her that had not been there in the winter. A warmth that was plainly not for him, and just as plainly for someone. Sir Hugh, who understood nothing of love, understood a very great deal about possession, and he recognized in her the unmistakable bloom of a woman who has somewhere to put her heart. He set himself to discover where. It took him 3 weeks and the bribery of a draper's boy to learn about the books, about the folded papers that went into them and came out of them. He never saw the man. Mr. Sinclair kept odd hours, and the boy was not clever. But he did not need the man. He needed the paper. And on a grey morning in the 3rd week of May, while Adelaide read aloud to Mrs. Penhallow in a house 3 streets distant, the draper's boy slid one folded letter out of a returned novel and into Sir Hugh Brant's gloved and waiting hand for the price of a half-sovereign and the promise of another. Sir Hugh read it in his carriage. He read it twice, and he began, slowly, to smile, because the letter in his hand was everything he could have wished, unguarded, intimate, written in her unmistakable hand to a man she did not name, but plainly loved, a man she called, in one line that would by itself have finished her, the only honest thing in a town full of careful liars. My dear Sinclair, whoever you truly are. A companion, a nobody of £30 a year, carrying on a secret correspondence, letters in her own hand, God's own evidence, with a steward. A man who, as Sir Hugh's inquiries swiftly established, was nothing but the hired agent come to patch the roof at the old Ellesmere Grange. He could ruin her with it. That was the first thought, and it was sweet. But Sir Hugh was a craftsman of his own malice, and ruin in a carriage, privately, was a poor return. He wanted it witnessed. He wanted her to stand in a bright room full of the people whose good opinion was the only coin she had left, and he wanted to watch her face as he spent it for her, all at once, in front of everyone. He wanted, in short, to be there when the indifference finally broke. The Asherton ball was 3 weeks off. The whole district would be there. The Asherton sisters invited everyone with a coat, from the squire down to Mrs. Penhallow and her paid companion, because a crowded ballroom flattered them, and an empty one did not. Sir Hugh accepted his invitation that very afternoon. He had the letter copied, in case the original should go astray, and he locked the original in his writing box, and he settled down to wait 3 weeks, with the contented patience of a man who has at last found something to do with his hate. Adelaide knew none of this. She knew only that a letter had gone missing. She discovered it the way one discovers a missing tooth, by the sudden wrong feel of a familiar place. Sinclair returned a novel on the Thursday, and there was no answer folded in it, which was itself nothing. He sometimes ran a day behind. But when she opened the book to fold her own answer in, she found her last letter to him still inside, unread, its corner bent in a way she had not bent it. She stood very still. She turned the book over in her hands, and the cold understanding arrived, complete and sourceless, that someone had opened the book before her, taken out one letter, and left the rest, and that the one they had taken was the one she least in all the world wished a stranger to read. She did not tell Sinclair. This was, she would think later, the great mistake, the hinge on which so much turned. But she did not tell him, because to tell him was to confess how careless she had been, and because she did not yet know it was disaster, and hoped, with the particular foolish hope of the cornered, that it was only a thing mislaid. So she said nothing, and she watched, and the not saying sat between them in the mornings like a third person in the room, and Sinclair felt it, and thought, God help them both, that the change in her was about him, that she had begun to suspect the lie at the center of him, that the distance opening in her grey eyes was the distance of a woman who has caught the edge of a deception and is deciding what to do. So he, too, said nothing, and guarded his secret the more closely, and each of them, loving the other, and frightened of the other's withdrawal, drew back a careful inch. And into that inch, 3 streets away, Sir Hugh Brant poured his patience and waited for the ball. It was Mrs. Penhallow, of all people, who nearly saved them. Mrs. Penhallow was 71 years old, gouty, imperious, and a great deal cleverer than the 40 years of being humoured had left most people able to perceive. She had buried a husband and 2 sons and a fortune's worth of illusions, and she watched the world from the deep chair by her fire with the unsentimental attention of a woman who has nothing left to gain from anyone, and therefore sees them clearly. She'd watched Adelaide for 3 years. She had watched her bloom this spring, and she had watched the bloom check itself in the last fortnight. And on a wet evening in early June, while Adelaide read to her from a sermon neither of them attended to, the old woman put down her embroidery and said, "You are unhappy, and it is about a man, and it is not Brand, because a woman is never that colour about a man she has refused. So it is some other man. And since you have neither the time nor the permission to meet other men, he is a man you ought not to know. Do not trouble to deny it. I am too old to be lied to gracefully, and you have never had the knack of it." Adelaide closed the book over her finger. The fire cracked. The old woman's pug, who hated Adelaide with a devotion that bordered on the religious, lifted its head from the hearthrug and regarded her with small, contemptuous eyes. "His name is Sinclair," Adelaide said at last, because she was tired, and because Mrs. Penhallow's was the only honesty in her life that asked nothing of her. "He is steward at the Ellesmere Grange. He is the best man I have ever spoken to, and I have no business speaking to him. And I think someone has stolen a letter I wrote him, and I am very frightened, and I do not know what to do." Mrs. Penhallow was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the brisk cruelty of real affection, "Well, you are a fool, but you are my fool, and I would rather you were a fool about a good steward than wise about a bad baronet. A stolen letter is a serious thing. Who would take it?" "I don't know." "You do know. You simply have not yet allowed yourself to say it, because saying it makes it real." The old woman's eyes, sunk in their folds of years, were perfectly sharp. "Who did you refuse, child? Who in this district has the vanity to need revenge and the leisure to plan it?" And Adelaide, who had known the answer from the first wrong feel of the bent book corner and had simply not been able to bear it, sat down hard on the footstool and put her face in her ink-stained hands and said, "Oh God, Sir Hugh." The same evening, 4 miles off, the Duke of Ellesmere received a visitor he had taken some pains to avoid for 2 months. His aunt arrived without warning, as she did everything, in a travelling coach with the Ellesmere arms on the door, and a maid, 2 trunks, and the settled intention of a long stay. Augusta, Dowager Duchess of Ellesmere, had buried her own duke 15 years since, and had spent the interval making the management of other people's lives her occupation and her art. She was 63, straight-backed, handsome in the carved and weathered way of a woman who had been a celebrated beauty and refused to apologize for the time that had passed, and she descended on the Grange with the air of a general inspecting a position that had been allowed to fall into disgraceful disrepair. "Nathaniel." She presented her cheek. He kissed it. "This is a hovel. You are a duke living in a hovel, 4 miles from a market town, doing the work of a hired man, while in London your name is a subject of open speculation, and your absence an insult to every house that has asked you to dine. I have come to put a stop to it." "You have come," he said, "because Lady Carstairs has a daughter, and the daughter is in her 2nd season, and you have decided between you that the matter is settled but for my consent, which you do not in fact require, since you have never once in my life waited for it." The dowager seated herself in the best of the Grange's bad chairs, and drew off her gloves finger by finger. "Miss Carstairs," she said, "has £30,000, a faultless connection, and the good sense to know what is owed to a position. You will meet her at the Asherton ball, which I have already accepted on your behalf. Do not scowl. It is the only entertainment this benighted county affords, and the Carstairs party will be there expressly. You will dance with her twice. You will call the following week, and by Michaelmas, you will be the sort of duke whose name is spoken with respect, rather than with that dreadful, pitying amusement I am forced to endure at every table in town. She fixed him with a look that had quelled bishops. You were not raised to this, Nathaniel. That is precisely why you must perform it the more exactly. A man born to a thing may be careless of it. A man it has fallen upon by accident has everything to prove, and no margin at all for the indulgence of his feelings. It was the closest thing to a kindness the dowager possessed, and Nathaniel knew it, and he might even have heeded it on another evening. For there was truth in it, and he had felt the truth of it himself in his blacker hours. But there was a letter inside his coat, 4 lines in a sloping hand about looking at the man and not the burden, and he found that the dowager's faultless logic broke against it like water on a stone. And there was a second paper in that coat the dowager could not see, one he had written himself that very morning, sitting over the estate accounts when the figures had blurred and he had reached for a clean sheet instead, and set down, in plain words and his own true hand, the decision he had made somewhere between the rent roll and the roof bill, that he would give up the alliance his aunt was even now travelling to press on him, and marry the woman from the lending library, or no one. He had not sent it. He could not send it. He had not yet told her who he was, and a love letter wrongly signed was a cowardice too far even for him. So he had folded it, and kept it against his chest, like a thing he was not yet brave enough to post. And it lay there now, dated, while his aunt laid out the future she imagined for him, and did not know he had already chosen another. I will go to the ball, he said. I will not court Miss Carstairs. You will do as I will go to the ball, aunt. We will leave the rest until after. She studied him then, with the long look of a woman who had been managing men since before he was born, and could read in the set of a jaw the difference between a position that might be turned and one that must be besieged. Whatever she saw in his face made her sit back a little, and her own face, for an instant, did something complicated. There is someone, she said. It was not a question. Some local, some nobody. That is why you have buried yourself in this hovel for 2 months. Good God, Nathaniel, at your age and with your name. But there was, beneath the contempt, a thread of something else, something older and more bruised, that Nathaniel was too angry to mark, and would only remember and understand much later. Whoever she is, she will cost you everything you have not yet earned and cannot yet spare. A duke who has fallen into his title cannot also fall into a misalliance. The world will forgive you 1 accident. It will not forgive you 2. Go to bed, aunt, he said, more gently than he felt. You are tired from the road. She went, but she did not go to bed. She sat up late in the Grange's cold gallery, a single candle at her elbow, and she did something she had not done in years, and would have died before letting her nephew see. She took from her reticule a worn miniature, its gilt frame rubbed thin with handling, and she looked at it for a long time in the candlelight. It was the portrait of a young man in a plain coat, not a duke, not a lord, a music master with kind eyes whom Augusta had loved at 19, and been forbidden, and given up, and obeyed her father, and married her duke, and been, by every measure the world keeps, a great success, and a fortunate woman for the whole of the 44 years since. She put the miniature away before the candle guttered. Her face when she rose was perfectly composed, but she had remembered, against her will, what it cost to be sensible, and the memory would sit in her, working, through everything that followed. Adelaide had 3 days before the ball, and she spent the first 2 of them being afraid. She was good at being afraid. She had a great deal of practice. She could do it while reading aloud and walking the pug, and writing Mrs. Penhallow's correspondence in a hand that did not shake. But on the morning of the 3rd day, she woke before light, with the fear gone hard inside her into something else, something with edges, and she lay in the cold, and recognized it for what it was. It was not for herself. She had been ruined in the world's eyes before, That was the wound she never spoke of. The broken engagement 4 years gone. The whispered thing that was not her fault, and had cost her everything as though it were. And she had survived it, and she knew, with the grim competence of the already wounded, that she could survive it again. The fear was not for herself. It was for him. Because the letter Sir Hugh held did not only name her. It named Sinclair. It named a steward carrying on a secret correspondence with a gentlewoman above his station, and a steward, Adelaide knew, could be turned off without a character, ruined past mending, made unemployable in a county that talked, for the crime of having been loved by a poor companion who could not keep her own letters safe. She had done this to him. Her carelessness, her sweet, reckless folly with the folded papers, would cost the best man she had ever known his livelihood and his name. And he did not even know the blow was coming. So she got up in the dark, and she lit her own candle, and she did the bravest thing she had ever done, which looked, to anyone who might have seen it, like nothing at all. She sat down at the little table, and she wrote him a letter she meant to send openly, by the carrier, signed, with no book to hide it in. Sinclair, she wrote, and then crossed it out, and wrote, My dear friend, I have been a fool, and you will pay for my folly, and I cannot bear it. So I am going to tell you the truth, and then you must save yourself. A letter of mine to you has been stolen. I believe Sir Hugh Brant has it, and means to use it, at the Asherton ball or after, to disgrace me. I do not greatly care for that. I have been disgraced before, and the world did not end, only got smaller, and a small world is survivable. But the letter names you. It will cost you your place. So this is what you must do. When it comes out, you must deny me. You must say I wrote those letters alone, that you never answered, that a lonely woman fixed upon you and you were too kind to wound her. It will be believed, because the world always believes the worst of a woman first. Let them. Let me carry it. I have the back for it, and you have a life to lose, and I will not be the ruin of the one good thing I... She stopped there. She looked at the unfinished sentence for a long time, and then she did not finish it, because to finish it was to say a thing she had no right to say to a man, whose face she had only ever seen across a library desk. And she folded the letter as it was, raw and torn off at the edge, of a confession. And she sealed it, and she sent the draper's boy, the same boy, though she did not know it, who had sold her, running to the Ellesmere Grange with it, before her courage could fail. The letter reached Nathaniel on the morning of the ball. He read it standing in the cold hall of the Grange with his riding gloves still on. He read it twice, and something happened in his chest that he would not afterward be able to describe, except to say that it was like the moment in battle, when the cannon smoke clears, and you see, all at once, the whole field, where you stand, where the enemy stands, and exactly what must be done, with a clarity so total it feels like calm, and is in fact the opposite. She thought she was ruined. She was offering to be ruined, to lie down in front of it, to take the whole weight of it on her own thin back so that a steward might keep his place. She loved him. That torn-off sentence said it more loudly than a finished one ever could have. And she loved him so much that she meant to throw herself away to save the man she believed him to be. And the man she believed him to be did not exist. That was the unbearable thing. There was no steward to ruin. There was only a duke who had let her go on believing in a steward because the believing was sweet, and who now held in his hand the proof of what his sweetness had nearly cost her. He could have ended it cleanly even then. He could have ridden to her, told her the truth in private, married her quietly by special license, and let Sir Hugh's stolen letter fall into a void where a duke's betrothed was simply beyond its reach. That was the sensible course. The Dowager would have called it the sensible course. But Nathaniel Vane had been overlooked and pitied and reduced to a coronet with a man somewhere inside it. And he had learned this spring exactly what it was worth to be seen as a man. She had given him that, in a lending library, for nothing, asking nothing. And he found that he did not want to save her quietly in a corner where the world need never know. The world had tried to make her small. He wanted to do the opposite of small. He wanted to take the weapon out of Sir Hugh Brant's hand in front of every soul who had ever made her lower her eyes, and turn it, and make of the instrument of her ruin the instrument of her elevation, so publicly and so completely that no tongue in the county would ever again dare to wag. It would cost him. He knew exactly what it would cost. The Dowager's plans, the Carstairs alliance, a measure of the careful respectability he had been told a fallen-into duke could not spare. He counted the cost in the cold hall of the Grange, and he found, with a lightness he had not felt since before the title fell on him, that he did not care for any of it as much as he cared for one torn-off sentence in a sloping hand. He put on his evening black. He did not tell his aunt what he meant to do. He let her believe he was at last coming to his senses about Miss Carstairs, and he handed her into the carriage, and he rode behind it the 4 miles to Asherton through the long gold light of the June evening. And the whole way he turned over in his mind, like a soldier checking a pistol, the precise shape of what was coming. The Asherton ballroom was the largest room in the district, and the Asherton sisters had lit it with a recklessness that suggested they did not expect to do so again that decade. 300 candles, hothouse flowers from a neighbour's succession house, a floor chalked in a pattern that would survive exactly one country dance. Into it came the whole of the county, the squires and their wives, the half-pay officers, the curate looking martyred, Mrs. Penhallow borne in like a relic on her companion's arm and installed in the best chair with a view of everything, which was how she liked a room. Adelaide had dressed with care in the one good gown she owned, a deep amber silk that had been her mother's and made over twice, the colour of brandy held to a candle. She had pinned her dark hair high. She had put on her mother's small garnet cross, the only jewel she had not sold. She looked, Mrs. Penhallow informed her with characteristic graciousness, less like a governess than usual, which is the most that can be hoped for at short notice. And she stood by the old woman's chair, with her hands folded and her chin level, and waited for the blow to fall, having decided that she would meet it standing, in her mother's silk, and give Sir Hugh Brant no satisfaction he had not paid the full price of. She saw Sir Hugh across the room within the first quarter hour. He was magnificent, as always, fair and smiling and surrounded, and he looked at her once, over the head of the girl he was partnering, and let her see the letter's existence in his eyes, the certainty, the appetite. She looked back at him without flinching. It cost her everything she had. She did not let it show that it cost her anything at all. What she did not see, what stopped her heart when she finally did see it, near the hour of 11, was Sinclair. He was standing near the door, in evening black, being bowed to. That was the thing her mind could not at first make fit. He was being bowed to, by the squire, by Colonel Hythe, by the Asherton sisters' own father, men who would not have nodded to a steward in the street. A stately old woman in grey silk stood at his elbow with her hand on his arm in the unmistakable manner of a relation of consequence. And as Adelaide watched, frozen, a footman approached him with the particular crouching deference reserved for the very great, and the murmur of his presence moved through the room ahead of him like wind through standing corn, and she caught, in fragments, the words that travelled on it. Ellesmere, the new duke, buried himself at the Grange, they say. That is the Duke of Ellesmere. The Duke of Ellesmere. The Grange was an Ellesmere property. Sinclair was at the Grange. Sinclair, who had told her he was putting the place to rights, the roof and the accounts. Sinclair, who read faster than anyone she knew and corrected the authors of battle scenes, and carried himself, she had thought, like a soldier turned upper servant. Sinclair, to whom she had written, in her own unmistakable hand, the only honest thing in a town full of careful liars. My dear Sinclair, whoever you truly are. Whoever you truly are. She had written it as an endearment. She understood now, with a slow horror that began in her stomach and climbed, that it had been a question, and that he had been letting her ask it for 11 weeks without ever once intending to answer. The floor seemed to move under her. She put one hand on the back of Mrs. Penhallow's chair. The old woman, who missed nothing, followed her stare across the room, took in the bowing and the grey silk dowager, and the large, dark man at the centre of it, and said, very quietly, "Ah," in the tone of a woman watching the last piece of a puzzle drop into a place she does not at all like. And it was at that exact moment, as though he had been waiting for the worst possible instant, which he had, that Sir Hugh Brant stepped into the cleared centre of the floor, raised his hand, and called for the room's attention, and lifted a folded letter high above his head, where every guest in the Asherton ballroom could see the broken seal. The music straggled to a stop. 300 candles burned, and Sir Hugh smiled at Adelaide Marsh as a man smiles when he has already won. "I think," he said, "the room ought to hear what Miss Marsh writes in private. It is such a tender hand, such warmth. One would never guess, to look at her standing there so demure, that she pours it out for a man who cleans other men's stables." So she had come, by the long way round, back to the beginning, to the 4 seconds, to the 200 turning faces, to the candlelight sliding along the gilt edge of her own ruin. Only now she carried a second wound the first time round had spared her. She knew the man crossing the floor towards Sir Hugh was not a steward she had loved, but a duke who had lied to her. And she did not know, watching him come, whether the thing he meant to do would save her, or only complete, in a grander hand, the destruction Sir Hugh had begun. He took the letter from Sir Hugh's fingers. He did not snatch it. He simply closed his grip and drew it away. And Sir Hugh, who feared no man in the room, let go, because the man taking it was the Duke of Ellesmere. And even Sir Hugh Brant's vanity knew the difference between a steward and a duke, and went, in that instant, a shade paler. "You'll permit me," the Duke said. It was not a question. He unfolded the letter. He tilted it to the nearest candle, and in a low, carrying, perfectly steady voice, the voice of a man reading something he was proud of, he read it aloud to the whole of the county. Every word, her loneliness, her longing, her unguarded heart laid open on the page. He did not hurry over the lines that should have shamed her, and he did not soften them. He gave them their full weight, slowly, as though each one were a thing of value he was displaying to a room of people who had not known how to look at it. And when he came to the line, "The only honest thing in a town full of careful liars, my dear Sinclair, whoever you truly are," his voice did not falter, but his eyes lifted from the page and found hers across the breathless room, and held them, and he read the last words to her, and not to the crowd. The silence after was the loudest thing Adelaide had ever heard. Then the Duke of Ellesmere did the thing the county would talk of for 30 years. He turned, and he beckoned, and a footman, too well trained to show astonishment, brought a small writing table from the card-room with an inkstand and a pen. The Duke set the letter upon it, in full view. He took up the pen. He dipped it. The page bore no name. She had never signed those letters, and that namelessness had been the whole of Sir Hugh's cruelty, an intimacy left open for any hand to claim or any tongue to twist. So the Duke gave it a name. At the foot of her own unguarded lines, in a firm black hand that everyone near enough craned to see, he wrote first, Adelaide Marsh, setting her name to her own words where she had been too careful or too frightened to set it herself, and then, beneath it, his own. Nathaniel Vane, Ellesmere, and the date, and one line above the names that he spoke aloud as he wrote it, so that there should be no mistake in any corner of the room. These letters were written to me. I am Sinclair. I let this lady believe me a steward because I was weary of being a duke, and she is the only person in 2 years who has loved the man and not the title. and I will be damned before this company if I let any man use her honesty to shame her, when it is the truest thing I own." He laid down the pen. He lifted the letter, ink still wet, so the candlelight caught it. "There is her name. There is mine beneath it. Read into that what the law and the church read into it. I have." And the room, which did not yet understand that it had just watched a proposal, gasped instead at a defense, a great duke shielding a poor companion from a baronet's spite, and broke, after one suspended instant, into the scandalized, delighted uproar of 300 people who knew they had a story to dine out on for a year. Sir Hugh Brand stood alone in the middle of it, the weapon gone from his hand, his fair face stripped at last of its smile and showing, for one naked moment, the small, cold eyes beneath. Only 3 people in that ballroom understood what had truly been written on the page. The dowager in grey silk, who had gone white to the lips. Sir Hugh, who understood that he had been not merely thwarted, but unmade, and Adelaide Marsh, standing in her mother's amber silk with her hand on an old woman's chair, who understood that the man she loved had just bound his name to hers in front of the world, and that the man she loved was a stranger who had lied to her for 11 weeks, and that she did not know, God help her, whether what she felt was rescue or grief, and could not, in that roaring room, tell the two apart. She got out through the long windows to the terrace before the crowd could close on her. She had not decided to flee. Her feet had simply taken her, away from the heat and the noise and the eyes, out into the cool June dark, where the Asherton gardens fell away in terraces, toward an ornamental water, and the hawthorn that lined the gravel walk stood heavy and white with late blossom, and breathed its almond scent into the night. She walked until the music was a thin thing behind her, and her own heartbeat was the loudest sound. And then she stopped at the balustrade above the dark water, and gripped the cold stone, and tried, with no success at all, to make herself stop shaking. She heard the gravel behind her. She did not turn. "Don't," she said. "Please. Whatever you mean to say, I cannot. Not yet. I have just learned that I've been writing my heart out for 11 weeks to a man who does not exist, and I find I need a moment to grieve him before I am introduced to whoever has been wearing his face." "He exists." His voice was very low, very close. He had stopped a careful distance off, as a man stops near a horse that may bolt. "Everything I wrote you was true. Every word. I lied about precisely one thing. My name. And I lied about it because the first morning you wiped a floor at my feet and scolded me for a wet coat, and you did not know I was a duke. And for the length of that quarter of an hour I was a man again, and I had not been a man in 14 months. I meant to tell you. I swear to you I meant to tell you. Every week I meant to, and every week I was a coward. Because the moment I told you, the man you talked to would be gone, and the Duke would be standing there in his place, and you would lower your eyes the way the whole world lowers its eyes. And I could not." His voice caught and steadied. "I could not bear to watch you stop seeing me." She turned then. He stood in the spill of light from the windows, the largest man in any room, and his hard soldier's face was undone in a way she had never seen it, and the sight of it cracked something in her that she had been holding shut with both hands. "You signed your name to my letter," she said, "in front of all of them. Do you understand what you have done? You are a duke. You could have married £30,000 and a faultless connection. And you have just told 300 people that you are betrothed to a companion of £30 a year, with a stolen love letter and a—" She stopped. The old wound. She made herself say it. "With a broken engagement 4 years behind her that the world has never let her forget. You have ruined yourself. To save me. Why would you—" "Because I would rather be ruined with you than respectable without you," he said. "I have tried respectable. I have had a surfeit of it. I find I miss the thing that unsettles me. It was her own line, given back to her from the first morning, and it went into her like a key into a lock, and the breath went out of her all at once. "That is the most foolish thing I have ever heard a sensible man say," she whispered. "I have it on excellent authority," said the Duke of Ellesmere, "that a place may be ruined and still be worth the mending. A woman told me so, in a letter, and I have carried it inside my coat for a month, and I have decided to believe her about everything." And there, on the dark terrace, with the hawthorn breathing white above them, and the music thin and far, they had, for 1/4 of an hour, stolen out of the wreck of the evening, the thing the craftsman of the story would call the glimpse, the relationship inhabited as though it had already been won. He told her his name properly, the whole of it, and she said it back to him, Nathaniel, trying the weight of it, and laughed at how strange it was, and he laughed too. The slow, held-back laugh played at last at the moment of greatest effect. They talked of foolish things and enormous things in the same breath. He said when the hawthorn comes again next spring, and did not flinch at the future in it, and she heard him not flinch, and let herself, for 15 minutes, believe in the spring. She put her ink-stained hand on the cold balustrade, and he covered it with his wide, warm one, and neither of them spoke of dukes or settlements or aunts in grey silk, and the almond scent of the blossom was, she thought, the smell of a door opening in a wall she had thought was solid. It could not last. Of course it could not last. The glimpse never does. That is what makes it the glimpse. But for 15 minutes on the terrace at Asherton, Adelaide Marsh was happier than she had been in 4 years. And she would need the memory of it later, the way a traveller needs a coin sewn into a hem, for the dark country she was about to enter, where it would be the only thing of value she was allowed to keep. The Dowager came to her the next morning. Adelaide was alone in Mrs. Penhallow's small front parlour, the old woman not yet down, when the maid announced, in a voice gone squeaky with the grandeur of it, "Her Grace, the Dowager Duchess of Ellesmere." And Augusta Vane came into the room in grey travelling silk, with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has never in her life waited to be received. She looked at Adelaide for a long moment. She took in the made-over gown, the ink on the fingers, the garnet cross, the steady grey eyes that did not lower. And whatever she had come prepared to despise, she did not quite find. Her own face flickered, once, with something that was nearly respect, and was the more dangerous for it, because the Dowager had not come to insult. She had come to do something far worse. She had come to be reasonable. "You are not what I expected," she said, seating herself uninvited. "I expected a scheming girl, or a stupid one. You appear to be neither, which makes this both easier and harder, and means I may speak to you plainly, as I could not to a fool. Sit, Chard. What I have to say is not cruel, though you will think it so, and it will be kinder in the end than the alternative, which is to let you destroy a man out of love, and call it love while you do it." Adelaide sat. Her hands were very still in her lap. She had learned, in 4 years of being a poor relation in other people's houses, exactly how to hold still while a person of consequence explained her own life to her. "My nephew," the Dowager said, "was not raised to be a duke. You know this. He will have told you. It is the great fact of him. A man born to a title has a margin. He may be eccentric. He may even be foolish, and the world says, 'Ah, it is in the breeding. It is his to spend.' Nathaniel has no such margin. He fell into this. He is watched. He is doubted. Every eye in London is upon him, waiting for the soldier to prove he cannot carry what 3 better men carried before him. And last night, in a country ballroom, he handed those eyes exactly the proof they have been hoping for. A duke who signs a love letter to a companion in front of the county. Oh, it is gallant. It will be told and retold, and every telling will end the same way. And that, you see, is why one ought not to give a coronet to a man not bred to it. He has not the discipline. He has not the sense. He marries where he feels. Each sentence was a stone, laid neatly, building a wall. Adelaide felt the wall going up, and could not find the place to push against it, because every stone was true. "He did it to protect me," she said. "Sir Hugh meant to ruin me. Nathaniel, of course he did it to protect you. That is precisely the trouble." The dowager's voice was not unkind. That was the unbearable part. "My nephew is a man who pulls drowning things from rivers. He cannot help it. It is the best of him, and it will be his undoing. He saw you in danger, and he threw his name between you and the danger, the way he would have thrown his body. Because he is brave and good and a little reckless, and a brave, good, reckless man, confronted with a woman about to drown in a baronet's spite, does not stop to count the cost." She let the words settle, watching Adelaide's face the way a surgeon watches a patient take the first of the laudanum. "But the cost is real, child, and it does not fall on him alone. He will lose the standing he has not yet earned, and cannot spare. The Carstairs alliance, £30,000 that would have cleared the Ellesmere debts, and given him the security to be his own man for the first time in his life. That is gone, since last night, beyond recall. And you will spend the next 30 years watching the world's pity follow him into every room, and knowing, in the small hours, that it followed him there because of you, and wondering whether what he felt on a terrace under a hawthorn tree was love, or only the fierce tenderness a strong man feels for the weak thing he has rescued, which is a real and a beautiful thing, but it is not a marriage, and it does not survive the slow grinding down of 30 years of being the reason a good man is laughed at." She let that sit. She was very good. She knew the value of silence. She let Adelaide hear, in the quiet, the precise sound of her own deepest fear being spoken aloud by a stranger. For there it was, the thing Adelaide had not let herself look at on the terrace, the thing that had stood just behind the joy the whole 15 minutes, and that the dowager had now reached in and named. Had he signed it because he loved her, or because he was a gentleman, and a gentleman does not let a woman drown? She thought of the cannon clarity in his eyes when he crossed the floor, the soldier's clear, cold certainty of a man who has seen what must be done, and she heard the dowager's voice lay it bare, and she believed it. God forgive her, in that grey morning, raw and sleepless, and 4 years schooled in the conviction that good things were not for her. She believed it utterly. He had signed his name to save her from the gutter, the way he would have pulled any drowning stranger from any river. And a man does not love what he rescues. He merely cannot, being the kind of man he is, stand and let it go under. The terrace, the hawthorn, when it comes again next spring. That had been the warmth of a rescuer flushed with his own goodness, and she had mistaken it, because she was drowning and grateful, for the thing she had wanted her whole life, and never once been given. "What do you want me to do?" she said. Her voice did not shake. She had a great deal of practice. The dowager had not expected to win so quickly, and something in her, some old buried thing, a music master's kind eyes in a rubbed thin frame, twisted at the sight of how quickly this girl had handed over her own happiness, as though she had been waiting all her life to be told it was not hers. But the dowager was sensible. She had been sensible for 44 years. She did not let the twist show. "Release him," she said, "publicly and at once, before the church or the law can make the betrothal real. Write to him, you write so very well, and tell him you have reconsidered, that you cannot marry where the stations are so unequal, that you hold him in too much respect to ruin him. He will not believe it. He will come. You must hold to it. A man like Nathaniel can only be saved against his own will, and only by the one person whose unhappiness he will accept as the price of his duty, which is to say, by you, and by no one else alive." She rose. She drew on her gloves. "I am not your enemy, child. I know exactly what I am asking you to give up. I gave it up myself once, and the world called me fortunate for 44 years, and the world was not entirely wrong. For one instant, the carved old face was naked, then it closed. Do the brave thing. The brave thing and the loving thing are not always the same. That is the cruelest lesson a woman learns, and you are old enough now to learn it. Let him go, and let him be the duke he was so unfairly made, and be content that you loved him enough to cost yourself everything, rather than cost him anything at all. She left. The room was very quiet. Mrs. Penhallow's pug climbed laboriously into the warm chair the dowager had vacated, and regarded Adelaide with its small, contemptuous eyes. And Adelaide Marsh, who had been ruined once by other people and had survived it, sat down at the little writing table, where she had written the bravest letter of her life 3 days before, and took up the pen, and prepared to write the second bravest, and the worst. The letter that would release the only man who had ever seen her, for his own good, because she loved him, and because she had believed, completely, the lie that he had never really loved her back. She wrote it, she sealed it, she sent it. And then she sat with her empty hands in her lap, and her dry eyes on the cold grate, and did not weep, because weeping was a comfort, and she had decided she had no further right to comforts. Nathaniel read the release letter at the Grange a little after noon, and he laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was the short, hard bark of a man who recognizes a forgery, not of the hand was hers, but of the heart. I have reconsidered. I cannot marry where the stations are so unequal. I hold you in too much respect to be the ruin of you. He read it 3 times, and with each reading, the cold battlefield clarity returned to him, because he knew that phrasing. He had heard the shape of it before, second-hand, in a story she had once told him in a letter, the words she had used to refuse Sir Hugh Brant. I hold you in too much respect. It was the sentence she reached for when she was lying to spare someone. She had used it on a man she despised to be kind, and now she'd used it on him. Which meant someone had taught it back to her, which meant someone had been to see her. And there was only one person in the country with the will, the rank, and the precise, reasonable cruelty to walk into a poor companion's parlour and persuade her, in a single morning, that the love of a good man was a danger she was obliged to save him from. He did not go to Adelaide first. He went to his aunt. He found the dowager in the Grange's cold gallery, where she had taken to sitting, and he did not trouble with the preliminaries. You went to her. Augusta did not pretend. She had never in her life pretended about anything that mattered. It was, though he did not yet know to honor it, the source of everything good in her, as well as everything hard. I did, and she heard me, and she agreed with me, which she would not have done had there been nothing in what I said. I told her no lie, Nathaniel. I told her that you would lose what you cannot spare, and that the world would laugh at you, and that she would spend 30 years as the reason. Every word of it is true, and you know it is true. It is all true, he said, and it is beside the point, which is the particular genius of the things you say. He crossed the gallery to her. Let me tell you what else is true, Aunt, and then you may decide which truth you would rather have carved on your stone. I was a hollow man. I do not say it for effect. I came home from the war, and 3 men I had never wished to outlive were carried off by a fever and made me a duke. And for 14 months I was a coronet with nothing inside it, going through the forms, and no one, not you, not London, not one of the £30,000 you are so grieved to see me lose. No one looked at me and saw a man. And then a poor woman with ink on her hands wiped a floor at my feet and scolded me for a wet coat, and did not know I was a duke, and did not care, and I came back to life. That is not gratitude, Aunt. That is not a strong man's tenderness for a weak thing he has rescued. That is the sermon you preached her this morning, and I can hear it in every line of her letter, and it is a lie. She did not rescue me from a river. She rescued me from being you." The dowager went still. "Yes," he said, more quietly. "I have seen it. The miniature. The young man in the plain coat. A music master, was he? Or a drawing master? Some clever, poor man your father would not let you have. I saw it when you left it on the gallery table the night you came, before you remembered yourself and put it away. You loved a man without rank, and you let them make you give him up, and they called you fortunate for it. And you have been telling yourself for 44 years that the brave thing and the loving thing were the same thing, because the alternative is to have been a coward once, long ago, about the only thing that ever mattered to you. And rather than admit that, you have come to my house to teach a frightened girl to be the coward you were, so that you will not have to be alone in it." He stopped. He let it land. He did not soften it. He had learned from her that the truth is kinder, undiluted. "I will not do it. I would rather be laughed at in every house in London for 30 years than be a man at 63, sitting alone in a cold gallery with a portrait in a worn frame, telling himself he was sensible. Keep your £30,000. I am going to marry her, if she will still have me after what you have done. And you may come to the wedding, or not, as you choose." He bowed, because she was his aunt, and he had been raised, even as a second son's second son, to bow to her, and he left her alone in the gallery with her ghost. And the dowager, who had not been spoken to with the truth in 44 years, sat for a long time in the cold, with her gloved hands folded over the head of her cane, and did not move, while everything she had built her life upon, to keep from feeling the one old wound, came quietly, stone by stone, down. He went to Adelaide at the close of the afternoon. Mrs. Penhallow received him herself, which she had no business doing, being 71 and gouty and supposed to keep her chair. But she had heard the whole of it from Adelaide in fragments through the day, and she had her own opinion of dowagers who came to other women's houses to arrange their renunciations, and she met the Duke of Ellesmere in her own front hall and looked up the considerable distance to his face and said, "She is in the parlour, and she has made a great mistake, and I am too old to watch a clever girl ruin her one chance at being happy because a duchess frightened her before breakfast. Go in. If you make it worse, I shall have my pug bite you, and he bites everyone, so do not imagine you are exempt." He went in. Adelaide stood when he entered, by the cold grate, and he saw that she had been sitting there a long time, and that she had not wept, and the not weeping undid him more than tears would have, because he knew it for what it was. The discipline of a woman who has taught herself not to want things, so as not to grieve them when they are taken. "You should not have come," she said. "I wrote you. I was very clear." "You were very clear," he agreed. "You were word perfect. You used the sentence you used on Sir Hugh. I hold you in too much respect. The one you reach for when you are lying to be kind. My aunt taught you a great many sensible things this morning, Adelaide, but she could not teach you to lie in your own words, so you borrowed the old ones, and they gave you away." He did not come closer. He stood in the middle of Mrs. Penhallow's shabby parlour with his hat in his hand. "She told you I signed my name to that letter to rescue you, that I am a man who pulls drowning things from rivers and cannot help it, and that what I feel is the rush of the rescue and not love at all, and that in 30 years you will be the reason a good man is laughed at. And you believed her, because you have spent 4 years being taught that good things are not for you, and she handed you the proof you have been waiting your whole life to be given. Have I the shape of it?" She said nothing. Her silence was assent, and they both knew it. "Then I have brought you something," he said. "Not to argue. I am done arguing. I have brought you a fact, and you may do with it what you like." He drew from inside his coat a letter. It was creased and soft with handling, the seal long broken. He crossed the room, slowly, the way one crosses to a horse that may bolt, and he laid it in her hand, and he stepped back, and he said, "Read the date." She unfolded it with fingers that were not quite steady. It was in his hand, Sinclair's hand, Nathaniel's hand, the hand she had loved across 11 weeks of folded papers. And the date at the head of it was the 3rd of June, 11 days before the ball. 11 days before Sir Hugh raised her letter over his head, before there was any danger to rescue her from, before he could have known the letter was stolen, because it had not yet been used. "I never sent it," he said quietly. "I could not. I had not yet told you who I was, and a letter like that, unsigned or wrongly signed, was a cowardice too far even for me. So I kept it. But I wrote it, Adelaide, 11 days before there was any river to pull you out of. Read it." She read it. The afternoon light came level and gold through Miss Penhallow's window, the way it came into the library when the sun got past the chimney at last, and by that light she read, in the hand of the only man who had ever seen her, "I have decided to give it up. The alliance, the 30,000, the careful, respectable marriage my aunt has planned, all of it. I decided it this morning over the accounts, which is a foolish place to decide the whole course of a life, but there it is. I am going to marry the woman from the lending library, if she will have a duke. And if she will not have a duke, I will find out whether she will have a steward. And if she will have neither, I will be the man she made me anyway, for whatever years I have, because she gave me back my own life for nothing, and I find I cannot give it to anyone else." One line. She read it once, and then she could not see the rest for the water that had come, at last, into her dry and disciplined eyes. "It was not the rescue," he said. "The rescue came 11 days later, and I confess I enjoyed it, because I am a soldier, and there is nothing I like better than taking a weapon out of a cruel man's hand. But the love came first, Adelaide. It came over a column of accounts on the 3rd of June, with no one in danger, and no river to pull you from, and nothing in it for me, but the certainty that I had stopped being able to imagine a life that did not have you in it. My aunt is wrong. She is wrong about you, and she has been wrong about herself for 44 years, and I have told her so this afternoon. The cost is real. I will lose the 30,000. I will be talked of. Your name and mine will be a story in every drawing room in the county. And I have counted it, every penny and every whisper of it, and I would pay it twice. The only thing I cannot pay, the only ruin I cannot survive, is the one where I am sensible and respectable and alone in a cold gallery at 63 with your letters in a worn frame, telling myself I did the brave thing." He held out his wide hand, palm up, the way he had covered hers on the balustrade. "Have the Duke, Adelaide, or have the steward. I am, on excellent authority, both, and a ruin worth the mending. Will you?" And Adelaide Marsh, with his 11 days early letter in one hand, and 4 years of believing good things were not for her, coming down stone by stone like the Dowager's Wall, put her ink-stained hand into his, and said the truest and least sensible thing she had ever said, which was simply, "Yes. God help us both. Yes." The Dowager came the next morning. She was announced again, and Adelaide rose again, but it was a different woman who came into Mrs. Penhallow's parlour, straight-backed still, grey-silked still, but with something gone out of her face that had been there as long as anyone living had known her. Some held and guarding thing, now set down. She did not sit. She came to where Adelaide stood, and she put 2 things into Adelaide's hands. The first was a folded paper. "It is my letter to Lady Carstairs," the Dowager said, "withdrawing the Ellesmere interest in her daughter, with my regret and my regard, and naming you, by name, child, Miss Adelaide Marsh, as my nephew's chosen wife, with my blessing entire and unreserved. I have sent a copy to my sister, who is the greatest gossip in 3 counties, so that by Sunday every drawing-room that means to laugh at you will know first that the Dowager Duchess of Ellesmere does not, and dares them to." Adelaide unfolded it. The hand was firm and old and certain. One line stood above the Dowager's signature. I have lived long enough to know the difference, at last, between what is sensible and what is right, and I will spend what remains to me on the side of the second. The second thing the Dowager put into her hands was smaller and heavier than its size, and worn. It was a miniature in a gilt frame rubbed thin with 44 years of a thumb passing over it. A young man in a plain coat, with kind eyes. His name was Stephen, the Dowager said. Her voice did not break, but it was a near thing, and the nearness was the most human thing Adelaide had ever heard from her. He taught me the pianoforte when I was 19. He had no rank and less money, and the kindest eyes in England. And I loved him, and my father forbade it, and I obeyed, and I married my duke, and I was, by every measure the world keeps, fortunate, and admired, and right. I have carried this for 44 years to remind myself that I was sensible. I gave it that meaning so that I should not have to give it the true one. She closed Adelaide's fingers over the little frame, and her old hand lingered there a moment, papery and cold, and surprisingly gentle. I want you to have it. Not to keep, to look at, once, and then do with as you please. Burn it, if you like. Only so that you understand that I know exactly the size of the thing I came to take from you only yesterday. Because I am the woman who let it be taken from her, and called the theft a virtue, and taught it to my niece as wisdom. I was wrong in my youth, and I was wrong again in your parlour yesterday morning, and an old woman does not say those words easily, so I shall say them only the once. I was wrong. Be happy, and be a little reckless, and do not let anyone, least of all me, teach you to be sensible about the one thing that is worth being a fool for. And Adelaide, who had stood very still and steady while the Duchess explained her own life to her the morning before, found she could not be steady at all in the face of a Duchess undone, and she did the unforgivable familiar thing. The thing no companion of £30 a year does to a Dowager Duchess. She set the miniature gently down, and she put her arms around the old, straight-backed woman, and held her. And the Dowager Duchess of Ellesmere, who had not been held in 44 years, stood rigid for the length of one breath, and then did not. And the two of them stood so in the gold morning light, while Mrs. Penhallow's pug looked on in deep disapproval, and Mrs. Penhallow herself, watching from the doorway, blew her nose with great violence, and pretended it was the dust. There remained Sir Hugh Brant, and the copy. For he had a copy. Adelaide had guessed it, and Nathaniel had confirmed it through a frightened draper's boy who confessed the whole of his half-sovereign treachery and wept, and was, at Adelaide's insistence, neither prosecuted nor turned off, only set to copying improving sermons, until he should understand the weight of a folded paper. The original was unmade now, signed over, in front of the county, into a betrothal, but the copy remained in Sir Hugh's writing box, and a man like Sir Hugh, beaten in public, does not forgive. He waits, and he leaks, and he poisons the well by inches. So Adelaide did not wait to be poisoned. She did the last brave thing, and she did it herself, and she would not let Nathaniel do it for her, because she had spent 4 years being a thing that men acted upon, and she had decided that her marriage would not begin that way. She called on Sir Hugh. She took Mrs. Penhallow in the carriage for propriety, and the Duke for plain fact. But she went in alone to Sir Hugh's handsome morning room, and she stood before the handsomest man in the district, with his beautiful smiling face and his small, cold eyes, and she said, "You have a copy of my letter. You mean to use it slowly, now that you cannot use it all at once. I have come to make you a present of the truth, Sir Hugh, which is this. It will not work. I am to be Duchess of Ellesmere. The Dowager herself has named me to Lady Carstairs, and to the worst gossip in 3 counties. My letter is signed into a betrothal in front of 300 witnesses. Every word you whisper from that copy will only remind the county that a baronet of 4,000 a year tried to ruin a girl and was bested, in public, by the man who loved her. And the county does so love to watch a vain man lose. You cannot hurt me with it. You can only go on for years, being the man who tried and failed and would not stop trying, until they laugh at you in every house you enter. I have been laughed at, Sir Hugh. I do not recommend it. I am offering you the chance to be done. You think a great deal of yourself, he said, for a companion of £30 a year. I did, she said, once. I thought so little of myself that I refused you only because I could not love you, and not, as I should have, because you are a small, cruel man in a beautiful coat. I have learned better since. That is the difference a year makes, Sir Hugh, and the difference a man makes who reads a letter aloud rather than whispering it. He taught me what I was worth by signing his name to it. You taught me what you were worth by stealing it. Between the two of you, I find I am no longer in any doubt about either. He stared at her. The beautiful smile was quite gone, and what was left, beneath it, was a small, frightened vanity that had never in 32 years been told the truth to its face, and did not know how to survive the telling. He gave her the copy. He took it from the writing box with a hand that was not quite steady, and put it into her hand. And at Nathaniel's quiet suggestion from the doorway, the only thing the Duke said in the whole interview, he sat down and wrote, and signed, a short retraction, witnessed, admitting that the letter had been stolen and its meaning twisted, and that Miss Marsh had done nothing that any honourable lady might not own. Adelaide read it before she let him date it. One line she made him add in his own hand. I was wrong, and I am ashamed, and I withdraw every word. He wrote it. He hated her with his eyes the whole time he wrote it, but he wrote it because he was a coward under the beauty, as cruel men so often are, and a coward will sign anything to make the bright, unbearable truth leave his morning room. Sir Hugh Brant left the district before Michaelmas. He was not ruined. Men of 4,000 a year are rarely ruined. He went to Bath and married an heiress who did not know the story, and was, presumably, as happy as a man can be who has never once in his life been honest. But he never again held a weapon over Adelaide Marsh, because she had walked into his house and taken it out of his hand herself, and they both knew it. And that knowing was a retraction more complete than any he signed. They were married in the small grey church at Harden Cross at the very end of June, with the hawthorn just past its blooming, and the first dog roses out in the lanes. It was not a grand wedding. The dowager, who could have made it grand, asked Adelaide what she wished, and Adelaide wished it small, and so it was small. The village, and Mrs. Penhallow installed in the front pew like a relic with her pug smuggled in beneath her shawl, in flagrant defiance of God and the curate, and the draper's boy, scrubbed pink and weeping with redemption in the back, and the dowager in grey silk with a music master's miniature, by her own choice, left at last on the mantel at the Grange, where she could see it, and need not hide it. There was no £30,000. There was a duke who had been a dead man, and a companion who had been an overlooked one, standing up in a small church in the long gold light, being, for the first time in either of their lives, exactly seen. A year and a little after, on a morning in early spring, with the hawthorn budding white again along the Grange's mended walks, the Duchess of Ellesmere sat at a wide desk in a library that no longer smelled of damp and neglect, with the morning light coming level and gold across a floor that was walked on now, and a great many letters before her to answer. For a duchess has a great deal of correspondence, and Adelaide answered all of it herself, in her own sloping hand, because she had learned long ago that there is no honester thing a person can do than set down the truth on a page and sign her name to it. Nathaniel came in from the cold, with the spring on his coat, and stood in the doorway a moment, filling it as he always did, watching her write. There was ink on her fingers. There was always ink on her fingers. He had given up the battle of it. He had, in truth, surrendered the war the first morning she wiped a floor at his feet, and scolded him for being wet. On the corner of the desk, in a small frame she had made for it, stood a single creased letter behind glass. Not the famous one, Not the one he had read to 300 people, but the other, the unsent one, dated the 3rd of June, the 11 days early one, that proved the thing that needed no further proving. She had framed it not as evidence now, but as a promise kept. He crossed the room and set his wide hand over her ink-stained one where it rested on the page, the way he had on a dark terrace under a hawthorn tree a year before. "Whatever you are writing this morning," he said, "you are not the woman who wiped a floor at my feet." That woman would never have believed she'd be answering a duchess's letters in her own library by the spring. She turned her hand under his and laced her stained fingers through his clean ones, and the hawthorn was budding white beyond the window, and she set down her pen. "Then it is fortunate," she said, "that you signed your name beneath mine. I find I rather like what we have written together."